In family law, there's something called legal decision making authority that covers major family decisions about things like healthcare, religion, education, and personal care. Here to tell us about how all those things are implicated in the pandemic and tips for co parenting during the pandemic is the Rose Law Group family law attorney, Audra Petrolle. So, Audra, what can parents expect to run into as they try to make education decisions in the pandemic?
That's a really good question. So, education is a major legal decision that parents have to agree to jointly, assuming they share joint legal decision making. And in a time like a pandemic where you don't always have control over how your children are being educated, you either have to relinquish that authority to the school where you are, assuming they're commanding virtual schooling or homeschooling of some sort, or you guys can get together and decide that maybe your child should now go to a different institution to find a learning style that better accommodates him or her.
Right now, a topic that's very hot button is the vaccine. What happens if two parents who have split up are on different sides of whether or not they want to get the COVID-19 vaccine for their children?
That's a really good question, also. So, again, healthcare decisions are major legal decisions on behalf of your children. And if the parties share joint legal decision making authority, they essentially have to agree. But if they reach an impasse, especially around something so essential as a vaccine, they can go to the court and find out, what the appropriate measure is or what's in the best interest of their child. And this frequently comes up issues surrounding whether or not someone wants to vaccinate and the other parent declines to vaccinate. So it's not the court's first rodeo when it comes to vaccines.
Religion is something that's very important to families, and not everybody can practice the religions as they're used to doing right now in the pandemic. So, how can that kind of come up when it comes to parents making a parenting plan?
Again, that's a tough one. So some religious organizations, have their places of worship open still. Not all do, or some have limited hours of operation. So parents have to really get together and decide whether or not it's appropriate for their child or children to go to a particular temple or church or other place of worship, especially given the risk of exposure in these communities. One of the biggest factors is the more people that you're together with in an enclosed space, the higher level of risk that you might be exposed to. So parents can enter into potential social distancing agreements where they say, the children won't go to any sort of public place where they can't be socially distanced at 6 feet or greater from other third parties, kind of thing.
If finances are starting to change amid the pandemic due to economic fallout, what are things that parents can expect to see when it comes to their child support agreements?
Sure. So the agreements themselves will continue to stay in place unless the parties actually go to court to ask for modification. Now, if there's a substantial deviation in what a party was previously making under the former child support order, I would recommend that you first talk to, the other parent to see if you can reach an agreement to modify the child support, whether on a temporary or more permanent basis. And if that fails, the courts are always open to you. Child support is always modifiable, assuming you have the appropriate circumstances. For example, where you have entirely lost your job or your income has gone down so substantially as a result of this pandemic.
And I'm sure that can kind of go along similar scenarios with spousal maintenance, right?
So yeah, you might be in a little bit of a tougher place if you have your spousal maintenance already refined to a written contract that says that it is non-modifiable in terms of amount and duration. Those are usually pretty ironclad and hard to get around. But for people who are contemplating divorce right now and spousal maintenance is an issue, they certainly could consider putting in some type of pandemic or, unknown act of God type disaster provision in their final property settlement agreement and their consent decree that could help insulate them from a similar scenario that we're all experiencing right now with the pandemic and limited resources.
What about like daycares and after school programs in the pandemic? How could that come up for parents who are co parenting?
So, childcare, whether daycare or after school programs, is always a common issue between parties, especially if you have two working parents. And right now, in particular, there's definitely a big question of whether or not that's appropriate for your child in terms of the pandemic and, concerns about social distancing and exposure to third parties. And separate and apart from that, you really have to look at the actual individual policies of the facility because if your child is part of a daycare, and then let's say you take them out of state for a week or longer, that daycare might actually have a policy that requires your child to quarantine for a 2-week period or something similar when you come back. And now you're kind of in the rough because you've paid for daycare or childcare aftercare, right? But you can't even use it. So you definitely want to be really alert to their policies when you're making co-parenting decisions around that.
Okay, yeah, that's a scenario I'm sure a lot of people are finding themselves in the pandemic. So thanks for bringing that up.
Especially parents who are long distance, right? So if one parent lives in California and another parent lives in Arizona, for example, and they have a long distance parenting plan, and you have to put the kids on the plane to shuttle them back and forth for parenting time. Well, a lot of the daycares are saying in particular, hey, when you get back, you better quarantine your child for 14 days because we don't want them to take whatever, they might have, I don't know, contracted and give it to the other children or adults in the facility kind of thing.
When it comes to parenting plans already, we also have to make sure we're keeping in mind other states' guidelines as well.
For sure. And that's a tough one, right?
Yes. Okay, Audra, thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Mel.